Hey y'all, and welcome to Politibrawl. My name is Brian, and Tim Burchett goes absolutely savage mode on all the corruption in DC, and this poor CNN hostess had to just sit there and take it. Let's dive in.
There's not one federal bureaucrat in Washington, D.C., man, that's taught a kid how to teach at West Hills Elementary School in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I dare say they've never caught any kids anywhere to read or write or do arithmetic. They're bureaucrats. They're like the mob. They take their cut off the top, and we can do a whole
sir,
lot.
I'm from Arkansas. That's where I was born and raised, and that's a very rural state. You know it well. It's your neighbor. But when you're talking about the Department of Education like that, they do submit funding for kids in those rural school districts for special education kids, and I think
right. And
right.
it's not one size fits all, ma'am, and you can't.
No, of course it's not. But
Washington, D.C. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead.
I'm going to say Washington, D.C. is the most heaviest funded school in the nation and has the worst test scores. And because it's not a one size fits all. What works best in Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, North Carolina, or New York does not work the same in Florida or Tennessee or Arkansas. Send that money to the states. Let the locals be held accountable. You have too much money that's tied up because of too many special programs, and nobody's talking about cutting off any programs to special needs kids or kids that are doing without. What I'm talking about doing is doing away with the fraud and abuse so that we can free up more money for them. And I think that's why you'll hear the unions against this. You would think that they would want more money for their teachers and more money for the students, but they don't. They want more money for the union and for the organization. And that's why you'll hear all the fighting and fussing.
And just lastly, look, I think one thing that has emerged is it's about the way this is being done. It's not. I think almost anyone can agree that cut the wasteful spending. Please, make the government run more efficiently. But it's about the way in which it's being done, and just going back to kind of where we started here. Just the way it's being done by Elon Musk, by these very young people who maybe aren't moving at the pace that I think some people are like, please just slow down for a second and don't scare people. I think people are frightened. Some people are frightened by how quickly this is moving and the questions that it leaves for them, that they are worried that there is disinformation floating around.
Sure, and they're worried because they're going to have to go back to work. These people
but I'm not talking about the employees. I'm talking about Americans who rely on some of this funding, or the farmers, like I was just talking with an expert on USAID, who farm the wheat that goes, around the globe. People like that.
Yes, ma'am, and USAID has been a complete ripoff of the American taxpayer. Shut it down. And regroup the system so that if the farmers are doing legitimate work, then they should get legitimate pay. But American taxpayers should not be in charge of policing or feeding the world. We need to take care of our own first. And the money that we send to USAID, remember this, every dollar is borrowed. Every dollar is borrowed that we are giving away. That model does not work. It is a recipe for destruction. And the people that promote these things, these far left organizations, depleting our funds, that's where that is the end result right there. And you will see the complete destruction of our system. And I think that a lot of people that are in charge of this and they're pushing this, that is exactly what they want to do. They're Marxists. They do not like this country. They hate our flag. They hate everything about it. And they will do everything they can to wreck it because they're spending this money recklessly, and they've just got caught with their hand in the cookie jar, and that's why they're squealing.
Always leave it to a Southerner to have a wonderful turn of phrase like that, because that's exactly what's happening. These federal bureaucrats have been caught with their hands in the cookie jar one way or the other. And furthermore, the Democrat Party, the entirety of them, are out there defending these ridiculous policies where there's hundreds of thousands of dollars going over to Peru to fund a transgender comic book series. Or we're going to spend $1 million in Ireland for a transgender play. Seriously, does not any of this scream wasteful spending to you? And I'm not saying you, the viewer, you're probably smart enough to know that this stuff is a whole load of hogwash. But ultimately, the very people who are defending this nonsense, there's one of two reasons to defend it. Either one, their sensibilities are so fragile that if anyone says, hey, there's probably waste in this department, that you would immediately defend the department tooth and nail because you're afraid that someone might accidentally cut food for little Jimmy in his wheelchair that can't get his school lunch. When I can guarantee you, little Jimmy in his wheelchair is going to get his school lunch. One way or the other, there's going to be some nice kid who realizes, oh, we screwed up somewhere, and his neighbor's going to pack him a sack lunch for him. Or something along those lines. Because these people don't have the innate ability to look at the human capital around them and think of, oh, even if we cut this program, these people are going to be fine. Because they have their own communities, they have their own abilities. That's one of the beautiful things, by the way, of having not only a limited government, but having state governments. That whole idea of local control, where people know their own constituents best when they're closer to them. For instance, it's much easier for the senator of, not even the senator, it's much easier for a representative from a county in Georgia to understand his people better than it is for a representative or even a whole senator of the state. Georgia is one of the fastest growing states, and one county might only have a couple 100,000 people in it, but that's enough for that local representative to understand their needs best. That senator is having to take care of a whole multitude of different things going on. And thus, they're not going to be able to pay attention to the minute details. That's why state governments work. That's why we have a fundamental balance of power in our federal government. And furthermore, the 10th Amendment, the end of the Bill of Rights, specifically ended on this note in order to emphasize how this government was supposed to work. If the powers that aren't mentioned in the Constitution, it's left up to the states. This is a wonderful ideal that can help individual states craft policy to help their own constituents. Having this from a federal level rarely ever works. And so when Tim Burchett is out there talking about the waste, the fraud, the abuse, or in this case, the sheer ridiculousness of where our taxpayer dollars are going, and you have instead of a CNN reporter asking the question of, wow, that's pretty bad. How deep does this waste go? Instead, she's out there whining and clutching her pearls, thinking that she's defending these poor, innocent people and making sure that everyone's getting their fair share of the pie. I'm sorry, ma'am, but we're already pretty good at that without you clutching your pearls and whining about it the whole stinking time. Okay? Look, we're not coming after school lunches. We are not coming after your Social Security. We are not coming after your Medicare. We are coming after the ridiculous kind of abuse that gets thrown around in our system. And furthermore, what we're looking like we're finding more and more often is that the USAID programs are in fact a way of funneling money either back to certain politicians in DC, or they are directly being used as CIA operative fronts in order to either pacify a nation or to make sure that nation is very pro-United States in a ridiculous clandestine way. That way they get to move money around without saying that, oh, look, our budget is very trim. You don't need to look at us. Why don't you look at these other issues here and just leave us be? Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen long term, because Elon Musk pretty much doesn't have an allegiance to the system. He has an allegiance to the idea of trimming the fat in our government. And for the fat that can't be rendered down into beef tallow, which we should be using anyways, it's probably going to be fully wasted or, better yet, used in another form or fashion. So there's a whole idea that our government can be streamlined. There is a whole idea that we can actually govern ourselves. And that's what the Republican Party has been talking about nonstop since Barry Goldwater in the 60s. And that's ultimately what took root here in the South. And I love using that as an example, but what Tim Burchett is ultimately saying is that the local governments are better at educating their students. The way DC and a whole lot of inner city schools work, they work by throwing a lot of money at the problem without investing in ways to actually solve the underlying problems that go with their education system. Our best ones, and I'm not proud of saying this, are actually in the suburbs just outside the cities where they spend less money per student. That happens time and time again, all because we know exactly where to best send the we know best where to send the money. We know best how to craft policy, and ultimately, we're learning this the hard way. Democrats just can't govern. And there's a whole lot of can of worms that can be opened up with that conversation, but I'm just going to leave it at that. That we're seeing time and time again that Democrats don't want to trim the fat, they can't govern, and it just becomes a worse and worse deal for their own constituents. And sometime that's going to change. And that's exactly why so many minority voters, so many Latinos, black men have left the Democrat Party and are now voting for Republican policies because they're seeing that something has not worked, and there's something about the Republicans and the Donald Trump message that just resonates with them. That's the reality, and it's time for them to face the music. Folks, my name is Brian. Hope you enjoyed that segment here on Politibrawl. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Catch you on the next one, and until then, y'all have a good one.